Well, if there are any other questions, please do send them in.
Well, if there are none, if there are no more, and I would do what Dr. Lings used to say, well, if there are no more questions, I should stop there. So let's not
No, there
tempt
are.
fate. Let's not tempt fate.
I'll ask Christopher because usually there are a few more that come in. Well, I'll ask the final question. Well, I'll ask this question to both of you. Well, I'll ask two questions. So one is a question from Moscow, which I think I mentioned, but I don't think we covered, which is what Dr. Ling said of his own transformation during the Hajj. And I think that relates to a quote that I found very striking, where he says one makes a certain spiritual progress in time, that over the years, if one practices a religion, one becomes more sensitive to certain things. And he says that he was actually more sensitive in 76 than he was in 48. I'm guessing if this is the final question, there may be more. What do you feel is the nature? What do both of you feel is the nature of the spiritual transformation that Dr. Lings went through and that we should all, inshallah, hope to go through? And also what you feel that people should take away from the life, from this film, and also from the life of Dr. Martin Lings, Shaykh Abu Bakr Siraj.
Very, very briefly, I would just say that, that to encounter such a presence as Dr. Lings, it's a rare and rare in the present day. And so I hope that this film stands as a testimony to how can I say it? Something that people can continue to look at and to take something from, in terms of feeling the sensitivity that to his presence, and somehow that's conveyed through that film. I know it's very crude, I know, to say that, but that's the best one can hope for, that somehow it touches people and they're moved by it.
Yes, I know it touched me when I watched it for the first time, and it's so simple in its format, but it's something that one keeps going back to and trying to get some, I think also just the images of Dr. Lings, there's a kind of peace in his face that it comes through in any image of him, and it's not what he's wearing or anything like that. It's just his own face itself. Dr. Reza, if you had any comments about the questions about spiritual transformation and about what you feel, what are the enduring characteristics that you feel people should take from Dr. Lings and from his life?
Well, I hope I'll come to an answer to that question in the course of giving an answer to a question, because I never really know the answer to a question when I'm asked, and I start speaking. I just hope that in the course of speaking, the answer will come. So that's the situation right now. Let's go back to the question of the spiritual transformation. And I think if we get to that answer, or that question at least, we may be able to get to a couple of key characteristic traits or qualities that one should learn about from Shaykh Abu Bakr and try and enter into for oneself. So the spiritual transformation, yes, he said that he was much more sensitive in 76. So what is it that made him so much more sensitive? What is it that had happened in those intervening 30 years that made him, in the eyes of many, a saint in the 70s, if not even the 60s? A few people I know who have told me that when they met Dr. Lings in the 60s, they were convinced immediately, oh, he's a saint. And I think it was in the 60s that, who was it? Keith Critchlow, I think, Rahmatullah alayh, the great expert in Islamic geometry. He said that there was a saint working at the British Library, the British Museum. And I forget the details now, but it was just, even in the 60s, people were aware that this man's a saint. So from the 40s, leaving Egypt as a young man, actually he was 42 or 43 when he left Egypt. And so what happened in those years? Well, I think that he would probably want me to say that the single most important form and vehicle of spiritual transformation that he was granted by the grace of God was the name of God. And that it was through the total sincerity and perseverance, patience, trust. Well, there we've got the answer to the second question. He said that what we need to get through this life, the spiritual life, the religious life, life in general, all we need, if we are believers, then we can overcome every single obstacle in front of us by virtue of three qualities of soul: patience, perseverance, and trust. He said, with these three virtues, you can overcome everything. If you can practice patience and persevere in your spiritual life, persevere with whatever is the, for Dr. Lings, it was either the Quran or the recitation or the invocation of the name. So whatever be your spiritual practice, reciting the Quran in all of the nawafil and the tahajjud prayers, everything, and memorizing the Quran to the best of your ability. Dr. Lings, mashallah, there was a particular time in Egypt, for some reason, I think his master there had told him that he had to recite something from the Quran instead of invoking the divine name for a period of weeks or something. I don't know. And so what did Shaykh Abu Bakr do? He learnt the Surah Yasin off by heart very, very quickly. And then he recited the Surah, I think something like 40 times, 40 times a day, which took the place of his dhikr. So the divine name, invoking Allah, 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 or another divine name, and then reciting the Quran, those are the two means by which the theurgic presence of God, the transforming, what we would say now, the tajalli, the fayd ilahi, the self-manifestation through the emanation of spiritual energy from Allah Ta'ala to us. How does that come to us? Through the Arabic Quran and through the divine names. That's the quintessence of it, those two forms. And Dr. Lings used to repeat that the divine name is the Quran synthesized, and the Quran is the divine name differentiated, mujmal tafsil. So they're one and the same thing. There's two sides of the same coin. And so he was totally transformed. So we got the answer to that other question. The three key qualities that I think he would want us to take away from, not take away, but to learn from him and to try and emulate and practice as he did: patience, perseverance, and trust. So as regards the transformation that allowed him to enter into the maqam of walaya at a relatively early age, we don't know at what point this transformation actually precipitated the fullness of the station of walaya. And just on this, a little footnote, Shaykh Hamza Yusuf, when he came to visit Shaykh Abu Bakr for the first time and met him, he was told there's an English saint, there's an English Waliullah in the countryside of Kent. So he thought, wow, I must go and see him. So Abdulazim Saunders brought him to the house, and they came through to see us afterwards. We lived next door, and all Shaykh Hamza could say is that I could smell the perfume of walaya throughout the house. It was everywhere. He's a real saint. His walaya is in the air. It's extraordinary. He was so moved by it. And Shaykh Hamza is, mashallah, very, 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 very sensitive to the sacred. I mean, having prayed behind him once, you feel electrified when you've had him leading the prayers. Electrified. Incredible experience. Whereas with Dr. Lings praying behind him, you just feel as if you're drawn upwards into heaven, like a feather that's being lifted by this invisible magnetic, sattvic force. It's beautiful, really beautiful. But it's serene, and this is the serenity that comes from the sanctity of sincerity and ultimate reality. That's wonderful. But with Hamza Yusuf, you feel as if, bang, what's hit you? Total electrification.
Yes.
So anyway, all this talk about Shaykh Abu Bakr being a waliullah, and it's not just we who are his friends and admirers and disciples, but it was someone like Hamza, and also other shuyukh, Shaykh Ali Jifri and Shaykh Abu Bakr Sudani and others who came to visit. They were all stunned by his sanctity. And I think the opinion was amongst them that, yes, by a strange twist of fate, I know what Ovidio's thinking right now, but I'm not going to go there.
No.
By a strange twist of fate, the driver of the shuyukh who came down to visit Shaykh Abu Bakr in 2002 or so, the driver of the shuyukh in this minivan, ended up in Syria and was learning Arabic, and he started to say to people there, I'm the one who drove the sheikhs down to Westerham and back up to London. And so a friend of mine who happened to be in earshot said, oh, well, tell us about it. And so he said, yes, the sheikh they were all convinced that Shaykh Abu Bakr was a waliullah. So we're talking about Shaykh Hamza Yusuf saying this with Shaykh Ali Jifri, Shaykh Abu Bakr Sudani, and Shaykh Muhammad Ba Shu'aib, and Fuad Nahdi rahmatullah alayhi was with them. So this was the group in the Zawiya. Fascinating discussion, absolutely amazing. But anyway, so they said yes. This driver said, yeah, the shuyukh are all at one. They said yes, it's clear. Shaykh Abu Bakr is waliullah, mashallah, mashallah, mashallah. We can't explain in any other way how his book on the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how could it have such qabul is the word they use, qabul, acceptance from God and from heaven, that it should be spread all over the world, and it should be so teach the true reality of the prophetic soul to so many hundreds of thousands of people. So this is all a sign that yes, he's a waliullah, but it's a shame that he makes a mistake when it comes to evaluating other religions. I think the phrase was fi i'tiqadihi hawla wahdat al-adyan, something like that. The kind of mistake he makes in his aqidah, in his creed, in his i'tiqad, his belief concerning the oneness of all religions. So what a shame he made that mistake, but it doesn't mean anything as regards his sanctity. He's a waliullah. Now, here is a very interesting question, that if they did say wahdat al-adyan without adding the epithet transcendent unity of religions, then what is being understood, and this is the problem, this is why so many people in Malaysia as elsewhere misunderstand this idea of the transcendent unity of religions. It's not a kind of mishmash of unity on this level of forms and theologies and rites, and there's no syncretism taking place. What's being spoken about is that transcendent degree. If you like, in Islamic terms, we can refer to it as the al-Kitab, the mother of the book. So that all scripture, all religions, all revelations come from this mother of the Kitab, and that mother of the Kitab transcends the level on which the different religious traditions articulate the formal manifestations of the transcendent Kitab in their own languages, the language of their revelations. So that level of absolutely unavoidable differentiation and distinctiveness and opposition and disagreement on the level of forms, of religious forms, must never be confused with an assimilation of the al-Kitab's barakah that enables you to see that all religions are from the same place, the same Lord, the same source of revelation, but they're inwardly one, outwardly different. And when you grasp that, then you'll see that Dr. Lings and the transcendent unity of religions perspective is in no way threatening the total distinctiveness, the uniqueness, the irreplaceability of the form of Islam. So if one understands that, it becomes much easier to synthesize the acceptance of all religions, spiritually, metaphysically, in the heart, while outward, exactly what Jalaluddin Rumi said, that چه تدبیر مسلمانان که من خود را نمیدانم، نه ترسا نه یهودم من نه گبرم نه مسلمانم. In his heart, he's saying, what do you make of this, O Muslims? I don't know myself. I don't know who I am. I don't know my identity. I'm not a Zoroastrian. Na Gabram, na چی گفتم؟ ویدیو یادم رفت. I'm not a Parsi. I'm not a Jew. I'm not a Christian. I'm not even a Muslim. I don't recognize myself anymore. What am I? That degree of totality of immersion in the universal essence of all the faiths means that your essential spiritual identity transcends your identity as a Muslim or a Jew or this or that. You are made one with the fitrah. Every child is born with that fitrah, and the fitrah is the spiritual infrastructure, the constitution that defines us as human beings, and that cannot be labeled as Muslim or anything else. The Prophet ﷺ said that every child is born according to the fitrah. Its parents make the child a Jew or a Christian or a Zoroastrian. But note, he didn't say every child is born as a Muslim. He said ala fitrah. And that the true Islam is that Islam which is identified with the fitrah, which itself is identified with the universal quintessence of humanity. And that universal quintessence is both essential and transcendent vis-a-vis the various religious forms of identity that one takes on, like one puts on one's clothes. It's the same idea, but those robes have to be dignified. You have to do it properly. You practice the form with utter scrupulousness to its requirements, its provisions, and so on. The religious form of the Sharia for Muslims, Dr. Lings was always trying to abide by these Shariite obligations down to their finest details. And mashallah, it was a tremendous example of how to pay attention to every single detail that you can put right, to the extent that you can put it right, on the level of form, to combine that meticulousness on the level of form with that complete detachment from form as such, and therefore an opening to the essence. Because you find many people who say, well, the essence is all that matters, the inward, the heart, it doesn't matter about the outward. And you find many people saying the opposite. The outward is the heart is ethereal and we don't know about it, but what matters is just the form. Let's do what we can on this level. So it's that this kind of universalism, essentialism, of Dr. Lings was one which was fully respectful of the forms at the same time as being fully receptive to the essence, and without any contradiction between the two. Outward sobriety and inward intoxication, which characterized Dr. Lings and the Shadhali tradition generally. And that goes hand in hand with an ability to address forms with seriousness and gravity and with propriety, appropriately, on the level of forms, while never forgetting their transience and their ultimate nothingness in the face of La ilaha illallah. It's one very difficult balance to achieve, but he achieved it and he taught it to, he tried to teach it to us, and we're doing our very best to be less unworthy recipients of these graces, because we certainly can't call ourselves true disciples, because disciple comes from the word discipline, and discipline of the kind that Dr. Lings was talking about was the discipline of giving yourself to God with all your heart and soul, as much as you possibly could, in the invocation of his holy name. And that would make you a disciple of Dr. Lings if you could follow in his footsteps and do the kind of dhikr. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu dhkurullaha dhikran kathira. If you are really believers, oh, you who believe, invoke God with much invocation. And that much invocation, that quantitative aspect, it's very, very important. It means you've got to commit yourself for hours every day to the dhikr, if you are to follow in the footsteps of those people who have been transformed by the dhikr. If you want to be like them, then do what they did. Invoke the holy name of God, recite the Quran for hours, and set aside Imam Ali says, set aside, alayhi salam wa karamallahu wajha, set aside the best of your times in the day and the night to that which brings you closer to your Lord, and take your body to its absolute limits. Balighan min badanika ma balagh. How many of us come even close to taking ourselves to those limits, which Dr. Lings and the discipline that he had made his own, that discipline was one where you want to do khalwas after khalwas after khalwas. We, unfortunately, with our weak, pathetically weak spiritual constitutions, we are incapable of doing those 40-day khalwas of old. Dr. Lings would say, no, that's too long. You wouldn't survive it. You'd either go mad, or this would happen, or that would happen. So we didn't do that. But what we did is every single day you had to take khalwas. Instead of doing 40 days consecutively, every single day of your life, you do short khalwas. And those short khalwas could be as short as 10 minutes, but they could be as long as 3-4 hours. And that was what Dr. Lings used to stress as the means of transformation. He would say to us that you may, I'm now paraphrasing and putting it in my own language, you may think that you're incapable of making all of these transformations of your ugly, disfigured spiritual state into one of beauty and harmony in accordance with the prophetic perfection. You think, how can I do this? And you would be right to say that you cannot do it. You cannot do it, but the divine name, Allah, can. What you cannot do, God's name can do, and it will do for you in the measure of your sincere and fervent and persevering concentration on the name. How are you going to transform yourself if you're just based on your own resources? You have to reach out to God for grace. And how does God give you that grace? He gives it through the sacramental quintessence of the revelation, the Holy Quran and the word, the name of God. So if you really want to be transformed, you have to aspire for that transformation through the invocation. As Ovidio mentioned earlier, khitamuhu misk, it's sealed with musk, this wine. وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسْ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. So for this, let those who really strive and aspire, let them aspire to this. It's a beautiful word. I mean, aspiration actually translates well, mutanafisun, the idea of فِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسْ, yatanafas. It's from nafs, it's from breathing. So we say aspire, pant for it, long for it. And only when you are coming close to that degree of dhikr indicated by the prophetic statement, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This is, by the way, a hadith that is cited in Ibn Hanbal. It's not some kind of Sufi hadith. This is, Ibn Hanbal cites this. Increase your dhikr until they call you majnoon, until they call you crazy. Hatta yaquluna majnoon. I think that's the Arabic of it. Until they say, you're a madman. Now, how many of us can put our hands on our heart and say, yeah, I do so much dhikr that people are worried about me, and they say, look, he's going a bit funny. How many? So that's the answer to the question. I mean, that's one answer that I think Shaykh Abu Bakr would want us to have. That on the one hand, patience, perseverance, and trust. And that perseverance is not just persevere through difficulties and trials and tribulations, which is obvious. It's persevere with the dhikr. Don't give up on it. Be patient and don't expect results overnight. When he was asked, is it so difficult, Shaykh Abu Bakr, the jihad, is it so hard against the nafs to get oneself in order? It's so difficult. And Shaykh Abu Bakr said, yes, it is difficult for the first part of the spiritual life. And the person said, well, how long does that first part take? And he said, about 30 years. So you see, this is the kind of patience we're talking about. It's patient to see that the transformation will take place, but not as you wish it to and when you wish it to, but as God wishes it to. But what God wants to see from you is patient perseverance with sincerity and purity of intent. And when God sees that in his own good time, in accordance with his plan for you and for this human race, racing very rapidly to its end right now, everything's predetermined. Every single thing is predetermined. Not a leaf shakes on a tree without it being in a kitab. Ma asabaka min musibatin wala fi ma asabaka min musibatin fil ard wala fi anfusikum illa fi kitabin min qabla an nabra'aha. There is no musibat, no trial, no tribulation that befalls you in the world or in your own souls, except that it is in a book of decrees before we bring it about. It's already decreed. It's in a kitab. It's a script that's playing its part. And, even if we can't understand what's going on, again, to go back to the beautiful image that Shaykh Abu Bakr gave us about the understanding of Shakespeare's plays, that it's as if at the beginning of the play, you're looking at a carpet the wrong way round. So it's all these crazy knots. And that what Shakespeare's magic does is to pull you through the carpet, and so that you can see the patterns on the proper side, the upper side of it. And Shaykh Abu Bakr said, this is a wonderful gift of vision of ultimate reality that Shakespeare has given us. And likewise, when it comes to the trials and tribulations of this world, they may seem totally absurd, unfair, unjust, and one starts to complain to God about this. But everything is in that book. Everything is in that script. We all have our roles to play. We're going to play it. Ma sha'Allahu can, wa ma lam yasha' lam yakun. That which God wills is, and that which he has willed not will not be. Everything is happening by the will of the Almighty. And to the extent that we accept that with our heart and soul as an aspect of our patient undergoing of these trials and tribulations, patience, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. It's the sabirun that are given that quality. Give good news to the patient that when they're afflicted with an affliction, say, we belong to God and we are returning unto him. So that return to God can be understood as the transformation, that we are constantly being transformed in accordance with this qalb, which is the root of the word qalb is precisely to be rotating constantly, moving around, revolving. And so that permanent revolution, if you want that to be more attuned to the return of God, to become transformed like Dr. Lings was transformed, And the easy answer is to have that kind of patience, that kind of perseverance with your spiritual practice, and that totality of trust in God that He will give in His good time what I need. It's not, as Ibn Ata'illah al-Skandari says, that فَدَّمِنَ لَكَ الْإِجَابَةِ, He's guaranteed you the response to your dua. فِي الْوَقْتِ الَّذِي يُرِيد وَلَا فِي الْوَقْتِ الَّذِي تُرِيد وَفِي مَا يُرِيد لِنَفْسِكَ وَلَا فِي مَا تُرِيد لِنَفْسِكَ. He has guaranteed you the response to your prayer, but in the time that He chooses, not the time that you choose, and in what He chooses, and not in what you choose for yourself. So if you have that degree of patience, perseverance, and trust, to really entrust our affair entirely to God, and not have any secret ambitions and spiritual ambitions, which are the worst ones. I'm going to become a saint soon. I'm so good. I'm so knowledgeable. That is the worst poison. And so the only way to get rid of that, you can't work on yourself and say, stop being ambitious, stop being egotistical. It's very difficult for the cat to stop chasing its own tail. So what's the answer? The spirit, the transcendent spirit, God, the objective, the alterity, the otherness of the absolute, who will help you to overcome all of these forms and shades and nuances and traps and snares of egotism and vanity and pretentiousness. We can't get over them ourselves. We really can't. But as I said before, Dr. Lings would say to you, you're right, you cannot do it, but the name can. So give yourself to Allah Ta'ala through the way in which He has given Himself to you, His holy name. Give yourself to that name, because the name is the named. Al-Ism huwa al-Musamma. In Sufism, that's one of the cornerstones of dhikr. To understand that when you're saying Allah, 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 you are not just engaging with a name and a sound and a thought and a concept. You're engaging with that of which it's a name, the named, al-Musamma. And so that named reality, which is present all around you and within you all the time, you become more sensitive. That's the word that we've been using about Dr. Lings, what made him more sensitive. You become more sensitive to the all-encompassing, all-embracing, all-penetrating presence of God, to the extent that you imbibe His reality through your ritual activity. We talked about wu wei and non-action, by teaching through non-acting and acting. But dhikr is the action, recitation of the Quran is an action which in a sense rejoins the mystery of non-action, precisely because it's the word of God that's being transmitted to you and through you, so that your human interference, your personal idiosyncrasies don't have anything to do with this. It's you, as you are giving yourself up to this flow of barakah, and as it flows through you, it's not really your act anymore. It's the act of God, that God's name is His action, His first and the best of all acts. These are the kind of things that Dr. Lings would remind us of by saying that, the dhikr is the most meritorious of all acts, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. What shall I tell you? What is the best of your acts? The one that will take you to your Lord most quickly? And they said, well, surely it's this, it's that, fasting, prayer, jihad. And he said, no. And then at the end, he said, the act that is the best, the afdal of your acts is dhikr Allah. So that is the best possible action. And so, we can, I think, probably stop there. There's something else I wanted to say. When Dr. Lings was in Egypt and all of these terrible events happened at the end of after the war, and the war itself was pretty terrible, but after the war, and then with the Nasserite revolution and so on, he had to leave Egypt. And this is when, as I say, he was in his early 40s. And the group of friends that he had in Egypt was so distraught at the prospect of him leaving. He was so beloved to everybody. He was already recognized as so intelligent, so pious, so calm, so generous, so compassionate. All of these things were already recognized in him by this small group of friends in his Sufi order there. They said, Sidi Abu Bakr, we're going to miss you so much. Please give us something by means of which we can remember you, a memento, something. And Shaykh Abu Bakr said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will write a book called The Book of Certainty. And he wrote this book in Cairo, or shortly after leaving. I can't remember how much, ever being told exactly when he finished it. But it's his first book, and it's a book of his own commentary on a commentary then thought to be by Ibn Arabi, called Tafsir Ibn Arabi, but it's known to be by Abdul Razak al-Kashani. And so he wrote the small book, The Book of Certainty, only about 60 pages or so. And it is a masterpiece to this day. It is a masterpiece of Sufi ta'wil at the highest level, not just the fact that he's translating and commenting on Kashani, but in his own right, Shaykh Abu Bakr is proving himself to be a mufassir, a mu'awwil, one who does tafsir and ta'wil. And it's a beautiful book. It's been published several times. And it's there out there. It's a masterpiece of Sufi gnosis, of ma'rifah expressed through the Quran. I can't think of anything in that short space of 60 odd pages that does such a brilliant, uplifting job of conveying what ma'rifah is from the Sufi point of view, expressed through Quranic verses. It's just absolutely wonderful. Anyway, so he wrote this book and he left it with them and they loved it. And then it got, I think he wrote it in Arabic first and then in English. And it was published in English sometime later. And why is this so significant? Because apart from the facts of what I've just mentioned, but it's so significant because in 1977 or so, when again I go back to Sheikh Hamza was looking for literature on different religions, and it was the only book that he found on Islam at that time. And he said to various people that this book led him to Islam. It was his first book that opened his eyes up to the mystery and the depth and the beauty and power of Islam. And so if you ask yourself the question, how many people have found their practice of Islam transformed, to use the word of the question, transformed by the perspective and the personality, the words of Hamza Yusuf, and you can't count them. And when you look and see that it was through this book written by a young Martin Lings, Sidi Abu Bakr, when Sidi Abu Bakr wrote the book, he had absolutely no intention of it doing anything other than answering a request from friends for something they can remember him by. So why I mention this is that the faqr, the poverty that was realized by Dr. Lings, even at that early age, in his early 40s, the totality of his emptiness of himself, his humility, his effacement, was already in that period a channel through which God could pour his grace and touch the spiritual lives, not only of the hundreds, perhaps thousands of people who knew him and who benefited from him, but the uncountable thousands who have been touched by the barakah Muhammadiyah through people like Hamza Yusuf and many, many others. And you see the way in which Allah Ta'ala's grace spreads through this world by means of his awliya. And this is one of the great commentaries that Shaykh Abu Bakr translated from Kashani about the deeper meanings of it's the Surah Kafur. عَيْنًا يَشْرَبُ بِهَا عِبَادُ اللَّهِ يُفَجِّرُونَهَا تَفْجِيرًا. That this fountain of Kafur in the Surah Al-Insan, the righteous drink from a cup flavored with Kafur. يشربون من كأس كان مزاجه كافورا. Whereas the slaves of God, the Ibadullah, the more they drink from the fountain, and they drink from it directly, they don't have it in a cup flavored, they drink directly from this fountain of Kafur. وَيُفَجِّرُونَهَا تَفْجِيرًا. They make that fountain flow with all the more abundance, the more they drink from it. So they have a dynamic relationship with this fountain. It's a unitive relationship, as opposed to for the pious, who simply can take a little bit of the kafur diluted in water in a cup. All of this is very far removed from what the slaves of God are doing, rushing to the fountain, drinking it. And the more they drink, the more the fountain flows. So there's a dynamic relationship between the slaves and the fountain, whereas it's a static relationship. The pious are not doing anything to the fountain, they're just taking from it. So one of the deeper meanings of that in the tradition is that the slaves are one with the fountain. They're not distinct from it. Their slavehood is an expression of their extinction in the fountain, in the one reality of God expressed in paradise through the symbolism of fountains, but it's their oneness with God that is predicated on the totality of their extinction in God. So that they are slaves, they're empty of themselves, they're fuqara, they're poor people, nothing egotistic about them. They've been effaced in this fountain of truth. And what do they do to that fountain of truth when they, as it were, return to themselves in baqa ba'd al-fana, when they return to themselves, but now the selves that have been transfigured by the wine of paradise, alchemically transformed by this wine, they then make that wine, the fountain, flow more profusely. And what does that mean? That they themselves, the awliya, the Anbiya, the Rusul, all of them are channels of celestial grace. Different flavors, different types, but each individual wali is like a channel, empty by virtue of faqr and fana, and not there themselves. Their personhood has been absorbed into the divine names and qualities and then transfigured and then outwardly manifest more as God, divine qualities than of simply human ones. So they are the ones through whom God channels his graces. Of course, God channels graces through anything he wants, but it just happens to be that the Quran tells us that these slaves of God are the ones through whom particular celestial graces are transmitted, and they flow abundantly down to this realm. And we have the capacity to drink from them, the living waters of which Jesus, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, spoke, that come to me, I will give you living waters, and you will never thirst after this. What is he talking about? He's talking about these very realities, these flows of celestial wine coming from paradise, enlivening the earth, giving rise to everything that we see, but also giving rise to the power that transforms you from outward profanity into inward sincerity and ultimately sanctity. So all of that becomes possible, you see, when you're around these awliya. And when you're not around them, it becomes more and more difficult to conceive of the possibility of spiritual realization. All you can see around you is hypocrisy, people going too far with the forms, or complete heterodoxy, people not abiding by the forms sufficiently, thinking, oh, it's all everywhere. So when you see heterodoxy and hypocrisy, think, well, no thanks, how am I going to get anywhere? What I want is sincerity. I want equilibrium, I want balance, I want the form and the essence, I want the barakah that comes through the saints who have themselves become one with the barakah that's flowing from heaven. Anyway, I'm going on and on and on now. I'm going to be told off by my wife for speaking too much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reza. People are still here, and I'm worried that I'll be taking up a lot of both of your time. I've taken up a great deal of your time. So what I'll do is I'll summarize the last few questions that we have, and then of course I'll bring it to a close. So there are a number of questions. So there are two addressed to a video, which is, the first is from Abu Izahar. Well, it's not a question. He just actually expressed some of the similar sentiments to what Dr. Reza was expressing, which was that he felt there was a lack of there was nothing like seeing a film on a person like Dr. Lings. His thoughtfulness, his mannerism, his expressions, or maybe purposely lack thereof. And then we have Rihanna from Malaysia asking a video how long it took to film the scenes with Dr. Lings. Because, and I guess this follow-up would be, is there any more? Because, and where was it shot? Because Rihanna said, I noticed Dr. Lings dressed differently in different shots. And then the last, well, Dr. Reza, there are many comments thanking you and Ovidio for participating and for all your comments. Sarah, I believe, from Sarah Sawaf, who's Syrian born, based in Saudi Arabia. She says her question has been answered, but the question was essentially about modernity and about what should we do in the modern world. What is the attitude that one should take? Is there any particular? Well, I guess not. I'll just read it out. What is the best advice on how to protect, enrich, and strengthen our spirituality amidst all of it, amidst the whole of the modern world? So I think I've covered everything. So I will leave it there, and if you could just say a few words to close in response to those questions.
Well, I just on a very practical a response to the question on how long I had with Sidi Abu Bakr. It was about 30 years, but the filming occupied one day. In the morning, we filmed him in his, the side room, and then in the afternoon when he changed, he was in his majlis area. That's all I can. So it was quite straightforward.
Yes. And did you have any other thoughts about the actual construction of the film and piecing together, I guess, the different putting together the different pieces?
Well, that was a longer process. I mean, as it was, I wasn't working under a deadline or something like that, so I could really measure it up and work whenever I could, just so it developed. It was more a passion project rather than than a commission. So that's the way I was able to. It evolved over a couple of months, in fact. Yeah.
And Dr. Reza, if you could just leave us with some thoughts about what is the correct response that one should have in the modern world towards spirituality.
Well, all I can say is what I think Dr. Lings would want us to, especially if it's to a general sort of audience, and the question is general about how to enrich and protect one's spiritual life in the modern world. And I think if one had to choose just one or two precepts, I suppose it would be one that's very obvious and one that's less obvious. The obvious one is that I think he would say that be very vigilant as regards things in the modern world that you would regard as perhaps being insignificant, but may have a tremendously significant negative impact upon your spiritual life because you're taking it as part of life, or it's ordinary, or it's normal, or this or that. Just be vigilant and ask yourself the question, does this or does it not detract from my ability to give myself to God with all my heart, soul, and mind? Ask oneself the question. And from a practical point of view, that would mean, of course, asking how much time do I spend on the computer, watching television, doing this or that, and how much time am I giving to God, because we are so used to having hours and hours on these machines that we think, oh, well, this is normal. But actually, if we stop to say to ourselves, well, how many hours am I giving God in prayer? Then it will make you understand the degree to which the modern world has stolen our time from us. The only thing we can give is our time. When we talk about giving God our heart and soul and mind and this and that, it's in principle. But when it comes out in practice, what is it I can give God to show him how much I love him and how much I want him? It's how much time am I praying to him? How much time am I invoking his name? How much time am I spending in my prayer room, as opposed to sitting in the front room watching television night after night after night? It would be that kind of question, you see, that kind of probing. Just look around you. And therefore, the answer to that, or the antidote to it, would, I think, from his point of view, be spend as much time as possible, not only in prayer, but also when you're with your family and in your working life, whatever, spend as much time as possible close to virgin nature. Now that sounds like a bad joke in lockdown, but it's, you know, it's the truth that we are so divorced from virgin nature in our normal lives. And virgin nature is the masjid within which we are to pray, and which we are awestruck by the stars at night, by the rising of the sun, by the fullness of the moon, by lakes and rivers and all these things that, you know, that's the original masjid. That was the place where Adam and Eve and where all of us in the primordial age were instructed. Well, didn't have to be instructed. It just flowed from us, from our fitra to the fitra out there, from our inner nature to that beauty of outward nature there. So he would strongly emphasize that, I think, but also in terms of protecting one's spiritual life in the modern world, I think he would also say this: don't allow yourself to be damaged by unrealistic expectations, given the place and the time that we are at the end of the cycle. Don't think that it's going to get any easier from now on. It's only going to get more difficult. And he said that a terrible war would most likely be coming before the Mahdi could return, before Sayyidina Isa can return, before the Mahdi can come, I should say, before Sayyidina Isa could return. That things are going to get much worse. So don't think that, you know, now we're getting out of this coronavirus and everything, things are going to get better and return to, quote, normal. But don't open yourself up to the, as Imam Ali says, habasani an naf'i bu'du amali. What has held me back from my true gain is my far-fetched hopes and expectations. And those far-fetched hopes and expectations are not just to do with the world, which will always let you down, but also in terms of expecting, you know, immediate fruit from your spiritual practice at a time when things are going to get much, much worse before they can get better. But on that note, I suppose Shaykh Abu Bakr would also want to have emphasized what the Quran says. La inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. That God will not change the condition of a people until they change the condition of their own souls. So there's a kind of insuperable optimism that comes from this verse. That there's nothing that can touch that optimism that really stems from the belief, the conviction, and the action that is consequential upon it, that I must change myself, I must improve myself, and I will do that through my prayers, and that cannot but have a positive effect on everybody else, on the whole environment. So his optimism always prevailed over any sense of a possibility of despair or disillusionment regarding the crumbling of the outer world. It was always a spiritual optimism based on the ever-present and superabundant availability of divine mercy. He says that we should convert every single moment into a moment of mercy, a moment of rahmah, because that's what it is. It's all around us. So it's up to us to convert that for ourselves into pure rahmah for our hearts. And the thing that is less obvious, this is all things that you would expect, but on the level of language, the modern world has made us all use swear words and slang and things very unconsciously. And the first time I met him, actually before I met him, he was telling me on the telephone in 1986 how to get to his house in Westerham. And I kept saying, okay, okay, okay. And at the end of the conversation, he said, oh, by the way, don't say okay. The tongue upon which the Shahada has been pronounced should never be soiled by any slang. And from that day to this, I think I've probably accidentally said okay twice. So from 1986 to now, it slipped out twice. But why was it that that it was almost completely eliminated from my vocabulary and my thought processes? Because this was an instruction. It may be considered arbitrary by many people. You know, okay is not bad. It's okay. Sorry, Ovidio. I had to try and make one joke in all this. So people would think, you know, it's all right to say okay. In fact, my cousin, who was a Cockney, Baba Shah Rahmatullah alayh, he said to me, well, is okay all right? And I said, what? Is all right okay? And I said, what? And then he said, I know I can't say okay, but is all right okay? So, God bless his soul. He was really funny. A real comedian. He's an actor, actually. He was an actor.
I see.
Yeah, Baba Shah. I think his acting name was, what was it, Bob? No, Barber. It was Barber. It was Barber Ali. Babberali. Anyway, this isn't an advertisement for him. He's passed away. Yeah, he's passed away. And anyway, so the reason why it was so effective an instruction to me, a command. Don't let that tongue which has said La ilaha illallah, don't let it be soiled by slang. I thought, goodness. Not only did it make such beautiful sense, but also because it was coming from a realized master, a saint, a waliullah, the power of his own realization was transmitted through this instruction to give me the capacity, not capacity, but just the inevitability, the unavoidability of it, that I could not say okay after that. It was very difficult, let alone the worst was. So modernity gets into our hearts through our heads, and our heads often through our tongues. And what we say really affects our mental processes and the way we say it and so on. And those mental processes send down poisons. If they are themselves poisoned by slang, they send the poison down into the heart, and they will not, to answer the lady Sarah's question, that if you want to protect your spiritual life, beware of the ways in which what comes off your tongue, whether slang or swear words or riba or other things, be very aware of how all of that in the modern world has become so normal as to make us think there's nothing much wrong with it. That's a really insidious way in which the materialistic and consumerist environment in which we live has made us feel that, oh, it's okay to swear and to backbite and to do this and to do that. So to protect ourselves in the sense of taqwa, protect ourselves against that profanity and profanization of language, which in its essence is, of course, sacred. Language is a creature of God, just like anything else. It's not just human convention. It was divine revelation language at the beginning, and then conventions built up around the different languages. But language is essentially, intrinsically, and inalienably a sacred thing. And it, therefore, potentially, it can sanctify us if we use it properly, and it can damn us if we use it badly. Right, so the rainbow is telling us that our time is up, and I'm sorry if I've engaged in a bit of verbal diarrhea, and in total opposite contrast to how Dr. Lings spoke and how much he spoke or how little he spoke. So I'm no example of what Dr. Lings was like. I'm a very, very poor disciple, very bad student.
No, Sidi, it was not. I mean, I valued every minute of it, and I'm sure everyone else did as well, and you as well, Ovidio. I mean, it was just,
Thank you.
this has been a very, very enlightening conversation and an enlightening film. And I'm very grateful to, well, we are here, all of us at Piecemeal are very grateful to City Ovidio, Dr. Reza Shah-Kazemi, and also all of you here who have attended this film screening, this online film screening that we've had. This is a beautiful thing because we're coming full circle. This was, as I say, one of the first films that got this type of response, and now, alhamdulillah, we've had the film again with the blessing of having two friends and students of Dr. Martin Lings here together with us. And thank you very much for coming to our event. Just remember that it's on the 4th Tuesday of every month. And thank you also to everyone involved in organizing, because there are many people who work behind the scenes. And thank you very much, everybody. And I hope that we see you all again next month. And I hope that we have more conversations like this with City Ovidio and Dr. Reza Shah-Kazemi, and that all of you can join us again. So thank you very much. I won't close the meeting immediately. You guys can leave comments or even stick around to discuss any more City, Dr. Reza and City Ovidio if you want to. And, or if anybody else would, if you'd like to speak to members of the audience as well. Because that's what we used to do in the cafe. So, but we will stop the recording. So thank you very much.
We'll say goodbye as well now, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So, very grateful. Thank you, Ovidio. Thank you, Adib. And thank you, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And peace be upon all of you, inshallah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Ovidio.
Salamat.